Hi, welcome back to Book Chats from Lonzo Public Library. It's my turn again, and I've decided to talk about one of my favorite genres, celebrity memoirs. I love memoirs. I read a lot of them. Some of them are very serious stories about people who faced hardship, and some of them are really trashy celebrity tell-alls, and some of them are in between. So I picked four of my favorites, and we're gonna start. We're gonna go from most serious to least serious. So if you're a very serious person, you can log off early. But if you want the trashy tell-all, stay till the end. So we're gonna start with "Born a Crime: Stories from a South African Childhood" by Trevor Noah, which is a great book. You don't have to be embarrassed to be seen at this one. So if you're like me, you maybe only heard about Trevor Noah when he took over the Daily Show, but it turns out he's had quite an adventure long before that. So this, as you can tell from the subtitle, is the story of his childhood in South Africa, where he was never supposed to exist because he was born under the apartheid system, and it was illegal for his black Xhosa mother to have a child with his white Swiss father. So he was actually, the proof of a crime. Side note on pronunciation, I actually listened to this one on CD, which, if you're a person that does that, I highly recommend it because, of course, he's a great entertainer, so it's a lot of fun. Very funny listening to him tell his funny stories. And he can actually pronounce things like Xhosa, which is not how it's pronounced. There's a click in it, but I can't do it. Okay, back to the content. So, because he could have been taken away from his family if he was found out, he had to spend a lot of his childhood hiding. He lived with his mother in a very sort of progressive mixed area in Johannesburg. But even there, if they went for a walk in the park, his mother would sometimes ask a lighter skinned neighbor to go with them because a black woman walking with a lighter skinned boy, he was what they called under their system colored, which, so there were black people, there were white people, and then there were people who were not either of mixed race like he was, or like Indians were also considered colored. There was a lot of civil rights stuff related to. Anyway, wandering off topic. And he also spent time with his family in Soweto, which is a black township, where he stood out because of the lighter color of his skin. But his mother was determined that he would be a success and he would stay out of trouble, so she kept him very busy. She made sure he studied hard. They went on adventures together, just the two of them, to parks and anything that was affordable, frankly, because she never had a lot of money. On Sunday, they didn't just go to church. They went to black church. They went to white church. They went to multiple churches all day. And so he grew up, Trevor grew up straddling different worlds. And to cope with that, he learned to speak multiple languages. South Africa is one of those countries where lots of different languages are spoken. So he learned to speak English, which he calls the language of money, but also Xhosa, Zulu, Swana, and he has multiple stories where people saw him as an outsider until he spoke to them in their language, which is a really interesting anecdote. So he got to be really comfortable with all different types of people. Despite his mother's supervision, he did manage to, get up to some mischief. And as a young man, he learned to make money in a variety of legal and not so legal ways, like selling pirated CDs and lending money. So it's a great book. He can't tell his story, obviously, without touching on some very serious issues, but he's a comedic writer, so it is very funny. It's touching, it makes you want to hang out with him. And you can read this book with no embarrassment at all, unlike some. And then the next book I have to recommend is Alex Trebek. The answer is Reflections on My Life. So as I'm sure you know, he passed away recently, which was, sad for a lot of us who have been fans for a long time. And if you are a regular library visitor, you may know that one of my proudest achievements is that I was on Jeopardy a couple years ago. I lost, but it was the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. And one of the greatest parts is that I got to shake hands with Alex Trebek. I had my picture taken with him, which is my Facebook profile picture. So, like a lot of people, I spent decades watching him on TV and, felt like I knew him. But, there's always more to learn. And so as soon as we got his memoir in, I knew I had to read it. As he says in his introduction to the book, Trebek wasn't interested in writing a memoir until he announced that he had pancreatic cancer and was met with just a tidal wave of love. Tons of messages and cards. And so he said, he wrote, "I want people to know a little more about the person they've been cheering on for the past year." So I thought that was sweet. And it's not, the book is not like a strict linear autobiography. It's a series of anecdotes, all of which are introduced in the form of a question, which I thought was cute. So I learned about his early life in Canada, what he really, really thought about that Saturday Night Live sketch about Jeopardy. Spoiler, he loved it. And the questions he was asked most often by fans. His favorite categories were movies and geography, and he thought he'd do all right as a contestant against, other dudes his age, but that a smart 30-year-old would wipe the floor with him. Which, those buzzers are fast. The book is full of his common sense wisdom, on all sorts of subjects from parenthood to the secret of success. And it's got some great candid behind the scenes photos, which are a lot of fun. And overall, he just comes across as like a humble, decent guy that you would like to hang out with. So that's a good read. And again, I don't think you have to be embarrassed to be seen reading that one, unless you're, really sensitive to celebrity worship. And then we come to Me by Elton John. Love him. Love the book. I've been a fan of Elton John, my whole life. I love his music. I love his crazy over-the-top persona. So I hope that the book would be fun, and it is. So it tells his whole life story from when he started out as a kid named Reginald Dwight, who was, shy and kind of chubby, and his home life was kind of chaotic. So music was his salvation. He actually was trained as a classical pianist, but rock and roll was his love from the time he discovered it. So when he teamed up with writing partner, not romantic partner, Bernie Taupin, in the late 60s, and they have written together lots of really classic songs, Your Song and Daniel and wonderful things. And so by the early 70s, he had changed his name to Elton John, and he became a huge star, known as much for his outrageous costumes as for his showmanship and his talent as a singer and musician. But like so many stars, it was hard to keep relevant artistically, especially when he started to struggle with drugs and alcohol. So, as I hoped going into this book, he didn't pull any punches. He spilled the beans, about his creative process and his shopping addiction and his sexual exploits and his epic drug use. That he really turns the mirror on himself and admits the times that he was, crazy, and difficult and drugged out of his mind. He also shamelessly name drops his friendships with everyone from Princess Di to George Michael. But ultimately, it's a story of redemption. He gets clean. He has invested tons of his time and money into charity, particularly his AIDS Foundation, which has raised incredible amounts of money over the decades. And ultimately, he ended up with a stable life with a husband and children. So it has a happy ending. So he comes across as, honest and humble, like I say, warts and all. He doesn't gloss over his mistakes, but he shares the lessons he's learned. And it just made me like him even more. But so on a trashy scale, you can certainly justify it as a tale of redemption, but he does, tell the trashy bits, which is, makes it fun for me. So it's in the middle. And then we come to the trashy celebrity tell-all by which I judge all others. Take It Like a Man by Boy George. And I think this is actually the book that started my addiction to trashy tell-all celebrity autobiographies. When I discovered it at a bookstore a long time ago. Because it was published in 1995, so it's not a new book. But it tells, his whole life story. He was a gay kid, was more interested in fashion and music than in sports. So, of course, young George O'Dowd was bullied. And his father was frequently absent and abusive, and so not a happy home life. So he ended up dropping out of school as a teenager and spending his time basically putting together fabulous outfits and going out to clubs, living in squats, and meeting all sorts of really interesting people, including Malcolm McLaren, who you may have heard of. He was an entrepreneur and mover and shaker. He created the Sex Pistols, basically, amongst other things. And so he discovered George, and he was in Bow Wow Wow for a while, which I did not know. But he ended up putting together the band Culture Club. And certainly those of us who lived through the 1980s remember Culture Club were huge. For a few years, they were very, very big. And lots of great catchy songs. But like so many of these stories, self-destructed, largely due to George's heroin addiction. And so, they put out a couple of mediocre albums and then they broke up. And George, continued to work and continues to work as a singer and a DJ, and has had some success. So at the time that he wrote this book, he claimed that he was clean. And maybe he was at that time, but it did not last. So unfortunately, he, as far as I know, continues to struggle with drug addiction. He has had multiple arrests, most recently, I think, 2009. So, he's continuing to be a troubled person, which is too bad because a lot of talent, a lot of imagination. But of course, what I love about this book is that he really airs not only his dirty laundry, but everybody else's. He names names, including he was involved with a supposedly straight man called Kirk Brandon, who was a punk rock singer. And he actually sued to stop the publication of this book and lost. And he also, George was involved with John Moss, the Culture Club's drummer, all those years when, I was a clueless kid and believed him when he said he'd just rather have a nice cup of tea. It turned out that there was this very drama-filled relationship going on behind the scenes. One suspects there might be a lot of drama in all of his relationships. And part of the fun is that he shares his barbed comments about like pretty much everyone he's ever met in his life. So, I say, if you're going to read a tell-all, go for it and read one where the author like truly tells all. So, the embarrassment factor on the Boy George book is a little high. It's a bit of a guilty pleasure. But sometimes you just want to read the trash, and who says you shouldn't? All right, well, that's it for me. You'll see Penny next week.